Welcome back to Operator Syndrome. I'm Patrick here with Steve, and today we've got a lighthearted topic. We've been doing some great interviews with some folks. Shout out to Ernie, shout out to David, shout out to Jose, telling us their stories. Um, but today we've got the OG crew back together. Figured we'd talk about something more lighthearted, and something that people, when we interact with them, will often ask us our opinions about movies and television, and specifically how special operations are portrayed in that media. So, I guess the place we decided we wanted to start with was, well, first there's a difference between move can be differences between movies we love, movies we enjoy, and movies that are accurate. But we know that people are often interested in movies that portray special operations the most accurately. And so maybe we'd start with that. I've got a few in mind, but Steve, I'm interested. Are there any that pop up for you that seem especially accurate, at least in some parts?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I may have mentioned it in the past. I think one that I think is based on talking to guys who were there, some SEALs who were there. Not a whole lot. There was mostly Army. It was Black Hawk Down. Um, and,
Hmm.
and I read the book by Bowden, I believe it was.
Yeah.
It's pretty accurate. And I did talk to one of the Super Six UH-60 pilots. One of the guys that was involved, obviously, well, not one of them that was shot down. Or two went down, but he was on another one. He was right in the thick of it, and
Hmm.
he, I talked at length with him. He's worked with national assets.
Hmm.
In fact, I don't know those 60s, were they from TF-160, or do you
They
know?
were. Yep.
Yeah, so
They
there
were.
there we go. They're national assets right there. So
Hmm.
yeah, I thought it was I guess just throwing off a couple of things. Um it really for me captured a how dizzying war can be when bullets start flying and things start going wrong. That's yeah, yeah, that's a whole category. It's like, we always look at these great medals, Navy crosses, silver stars, um the Congressional Medal of Honor, of course, which is not as common, obviously, and think, oh, acts of heroism and real cool ass fighting and being people doing superhuman stuff. It's usually when stuff goes completely terribly wrong,
Hmm.
when those kind of things are won. And most of the time, it is not at all glamorous. It is just a complete shitstorm that you're trying to just stay alive and think clearly.
Hmm.
Um, so what happened there when the Blackhawks went down, it just compounded everything that was they were there to capture a high value target. The National Mission Unit on the Army side was there to get this guy. The Rangers were going to cordon off, do their blocking maneuvers, which is quite typical. Well, it's one of the more common thing that the Rangers do in tandem with the national assets. And guy fell out of missed a fast rope and fell to the ground, and like I don't know if he like broke his back or something. And it's
Hmm.
just one group got pinned down really bad. One group got separated. They could
Hmm.
they weren't in comms with they were totally lost. And these people are fierce fighters that it's no joke. I mean, they come out of the woodwork. And one of the things people may or may not know about some of the Somalis, many Somali men, is they chew this cot, which is like an amphetamine, and it gets them completely high, like being on coke, to where they can do some extraordinary stuff. Being that high, it'd be like being on speed, which would be common for anybody, but it just makes it worse. And they're really, life is cheap over there. I mean, life is really cheap for those people. I don't say that with any kind of judgment. It's just terrible political situation, a lot of starvation, a lot of corruption. So they come out to fight, and I mean, they're coming out of the woodwork. And that's the scariest thing for a bunch of soldiers. It's one thing you got a cohesive unit and you can kind of size up a relatively even matched another unit maybe you're attacking militarily. But when you have people just coming out of the woodwork, um, that's scary because you can get overrun. It doesn't take that many people to
Hmm.
overrun the small unit tactics that Patrick and I are used to using. We, so there's that. Um, and it just went south really quick, and it just became such a fog. The fog of war is like a term used for that dizzying confusion and chaos. I thought that was really really good for starters. I'll throw it back to Patrick.
Yeah, I agree. Black Hawk Down, I'd later learn, and I talk about it earlier on in the podcast series about my story and how I ended
Yeah.
up where I ended up in the Ranger Regiment. But it's a fact, embarrassing or not, the Black Hawk Down had a big part to do with that. Black Hawk Down came out right before I joined the military. It came out and I think it came out right after or right before 9/11
Yeah.
happened. It
In
was
that
right
ball.
around that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of feelings, because of 9/11, and then this movie comes out, and I was already interested in going into the military, and then, that kinda solidified for me, which looking back, it seems insane. Like, if you watch that movie, you're like, "Oh, yeah, that's what I wanna do. That's what I
Oh
wanna
yeah,
do."
yeah.
But, there's something about a young man's mind that makes him interested. Um, Number 1, agreed. What makes it accurate is, like you said, it's the confusion. It
Hmm.
it really does a good job on, in a movie depicting how confusing combat can be, how people get split up, how people get turned around,
Yeah.
especially when you're doing these raids. Oftentimes you're sort of dropping down into areas you've never been before, you know?
Right. Right.
And so it's so easy to get turned around. And in my day, we had the luxury of, overhead imagery and GPS and all kinds
Yeah.
of things. And it was still often confusing, especially once the shooting starts.
Oh yeah.
Um, and most of the time when the shooting starts, you know, it's not that easy. It's not like someone starts shooting at you and you immediately start shooting back. A lot of times there's like a pause where you're
Yeah.
double checking to make sure
Yeah.
like that's not our guy shooting at me, right? Like
Right. Right.
and there's a hesitation in yourself like I'm not interested in killing our own guys just because we're all mixed up.
Yeah.
Sometimes you know exactly where you are, but you don't know. Another team, another platoon, they could be confused and they could be turned around. And they end up somehow in front of you. So absolutely, number one, confusion is is one of the best things that Black Hawk Down portrays accurately. Um, equipment,
Yeah.
equipment and gear, it does a great job
Yeah.
of the time.
Of the
Um,
time.
um, they actually use the right aircraft, which for us, if we were watching it, that would be a
Right.
big thing. That would be a detractor. I
Big
actually
time.
had the DVD back in the day, and I had like the director's commentary. And
Uh-huh.
apparently, because to use the accurate aircraft, they had to have some sort of, you know, MOU, some sort of memorandum, some sort of agreement with the military to use their aircraft, right? And
Yeah.
pilot
Yeah.
time and all that. And I guess for a while it was questionable whether they'd get that support from the military. So they had like a backup plan to use Hueys
Oh
instead, and that
yeah.
alone would have just been
Yeah.
like,
Oh yeah. That would have
you know,
ruined.
so Vietnam style Hueys coming in the movie Black Hawk Down. You would have had
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
change the
Yeah.
name at that point.
Oh, that would have been a tragedy.
But their gear and equipment is
Yeah.
accurate, is to the best of my knowledge accurate at the time. Um,
I can
so
say,
that Go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I just say affirming that we and everything is time sensitive. You got to realize. I mean, it should be obvious, but you go back to World War II, they're not using the same gear that we're using today.
Yeah.
So it changes, always evolves. Our weaponry and gear gets better, gets much better. My friend Kevin was telling me when I was out at Dev Group, he was showing. I said, "What's how this guy's so good?" I mean, can, depend the number of missions they go out on and the relatively few people they lose is staggering to me. Um, and he goes, well, one thing is comms are so much better than back in our day. And that is a huge, I mean, that's a huge advantage. Good comms and reliable comms and clear comms, things like that aren't as exciting to talk about as a cool
Hmm.
ass weapon, but really are critical. But I was just going to say, I did a we did a joint op with the Army's National Mission Unit back into that same time period. It was a time of Somalia, but it was I was still in the early 90s. It was about 93, I think. And sure enough, the guys from the National Mission Unit on the Army side they looked exactly the same as in that movie. They had knee pads back then. They had it, their gear was just the same as we used in training with them. I was like, damn, they got that right on the money. They were flying on little birds. They were using the same kind of helmets back in that day. So yeah, really, really accurate on equipment, I think.
Another thing I thought that was they did a better job of doing was portraying um the culture
Yeah,
of the various units. Now, I
yeah.
think some of it is exaggerated for effect, and it's probably because the author of the original book, Black Hawk Down, I think we said Mark Bowden, something like
Bowden,
that.
Bowden, yeah,
Um, I I remember I read the book a million years ago, but I
yeah,
think that's part of what he dives into is the culture, and so for the Rangers, the Rangers, it portrays it accurately, right? They're all of the time, and it's kind of a thing with the modern Ranger Regiment, but not as much out, on a mission, but buttoned up, right, in their
yeah.
uniforms, addressing each other by their ranks, their
High
superior,
and tight.
the hierarchy, the high and tight of the time. The high and tight
Yeah.
was a standard; you had to have it. I guess you could shave your head bald if you didn't want to. I probably would have been like a buzz my hair type dude instead of have the high and tight if I were in. But that persisted until like 2003.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess what happened was, all the other units we were working with were basically like, you guys got to cut that out. Basically, I think that's what it came down to because we were
Yeah.
working with, the special mission units from Navy and Army, but also, Whiteside, SEALs, Green Beret. They're like,
Yeah.
you got to cut that out. Basically,
Yeah.
basically,
That's funny.
they're like, if we're gonna be working together, you can't cramp our style.
Yeah.
Rule number one.
Yeah.
So, so,
That
so
is
that
funny.
was up until so the haircuts, but the culture, I
Hmm.
think, was accurately represented on the in the movie. They call them what they are, Delta Force. In the movie in
Yeah.
Black Hawk Down, they exaggerate, I think, a lot of things for effect, just to show that
Yeah. Yeah.
they've got a different mindset
Yeah.
and all that type of stuff. They kind of represent it. I think maybe unfairly, they kind of represent as like this
I
cavalierness.
I think so.
Yeah.
I got
Um,
that idea. Like,
yeah,
this here's my safety sword.
exactly. That's
Yeah,
a
man.
great line, and everyone quotes
Yeah.
it all the time. But
Yeah. Yeah.
but but you know, but they're trying to show that they're different. They're very different. They're
Yeah.
very
Very.
different in the way they think.
Yeah.
And but that is also true. But what you and I know, and what a lot of people don't know, is that a lot of folks from that unit come from the Ranger Regiment.
Yeah.
So it's for me, if you even dig in a little deeper, like
Yeah.
you can kind of see in that transition, sort of like shedding one's old self for like this new personality and this new job that you're doing,
Yeah.
so it's almost something deeper. Um, and when you hear folks who, join, the special missions unit, and they talk about where they come from, a lot of them who come from the Ranger Regiment, they have a lot of reverence for the time they were there, but they also talk about how the the attitudes and the culture that shaped them foundationally um, was important for their growth and important for getting them to where they needed to go. But that wasn't the right attitude that was gonna carry them forward in their new job.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's I agree that I don't know as much about that culture as I do my side of the fence, but one of the differences in the two national mission units, the Navy side and the Army side, is anybody basically in the Army can apply for selection to the national mission unit. Now, that being said, yeah, even Patrick and Kevin both told me, like, they're pretty much a Ranger organization as a whole, because there's so many guys come from the Rangers, but not exclusively. And some people come from infantry, I mean, or just wherever. Whereas in the Navy Special Mission Unit, you have to be a qualified SEAL, and that's the only way to get there, unless you're doing a support capacity like boat driver or dog handler or something like that. That's an exception. But all the assaulters, the people in the stack, recce guys, breachers, they're all SEALs. So that would be a different. But there wasn't much in the way of Navy in the movie Black Hawk Down. It was it was all Army in it, but it was mostly Hollow Army, so it shouldn't have been. I mean, I don't even think they had much to do with that episode when the helicopters went down.
Another, so that's a good one that has some good accuracy. Not perfect. We're not saying it's perfect, but it had elements that portrayed it accurately.
Yeah,
I want to ask your opinion. You ever seen Heartbreak Ridge?
yeah,
You
yeah,
seen that movie? So,
yeah,
yeah, so a lot of movies of that time were horrifically inaccurate.
yeah.
But Heartbreak Ridge, I thought, had a lot of gems in it.
Uh-huh.
Personally, from the look and feel, it felt like uniforms,
Yeah,
equipment, some of the tactics I thought were not that far off relative to its peers
yeah,
in the movies at the time.
right.
What are your thoughts on what you saw there?
Yeah. Well, that kind of stuff I think was pretty good to go. That wasn't that about Clint Eastwood when they went into Grenada?
It was, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
well, those were Rangers. Those were not Marines that went into Grenada. By and large, there may have been some Marines down there, but it,
Yeah, yeah. So and I'm connecting it to Black Hawk Down because of why I thought maybe the accuracy was better.
yeah,
But in Black Hawk Down, they had military assistance, equipment and assistance, and advisors from the actual unit to help it out. In Heartbreak Ridge, the director or the producers of the movie originally went to the Rangers because the Rangers the story about rescuing the students and a lot of the smaller the smaller sort of subplot stories missions was actually
uh-huh.
Rangers in Grenada during Operation Urgent Fury that carried that out. But I guess the Rangers said no thanks, we don't want to help, we don't want to participate in this.
I
And then
got
the
you.
Marine Corps, in their infinite wisdom, understanding this is a freaking Clint Eastwood movie, heck
Yeah,
yeah, we're
it's a
going
recruiting tool.
a great recruiting tool. And by the way, the Marine Corps did have representation
Yeah,
in Operation Urgent Fury.
yeah.
They did have some pretty good gunfights during Urgent Fury, but the specific missions in the movie Heartbreak Ridge were actually carried out by Rangers at the time.
The
Uh,
big one on that campus, getting those
yeah,
students,
exactly.
and
Getting the
there's some SEALs that got pinned down in there from Dev Group that the Rangers helped out too. They got in a bad jam.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, Urgent Fury has a lot of interesting stories. I'll plug. There's a book out there called Urgent Fury. It's out right now on
Oh
Amazon.
yeah,
Go
is it
check it
on
out.
Amazon?
It has a supernatural bent, but you go check it out. But
Is it on Amazon?
it's on
Oh
Amazon.
my gosh, I got to
Uh,
get it.
so
I'm slacking here.
but urgent there are a lot of very interesting stories about that operation.
Uh-huh.
And to your point, like there's some very interesting missions. The SEALs, they had lost some. And you talked
Yeah,
about this before. They'd lost some folks in some of the initial reconnaissance, unfortunately, and some
yeah.
things went bad in that respect. But they also had some very cool missions. They were taking out a radio station and they were
Mhm.
rescuing the governor general of the island. I mean, there was some
Right.
real good like special operations work to do during that mission. So folks
Yeah,
should read up on it,
yeah.
regardless.
True.
Um, but yeah, so the Marine Corps. So from the advisory perspective, it seemed like that helped out, and that's what I was trying to get to in terms of accuracy. It feels like I don't know. Have you seen the TV show? I think it's CBS SEAL Team. Have you caught any of that?
Man, I have not watched a full episode of that. I just get it's so silly to me. I just turn it off. I
Yeah,
can't take it. I can't take it.
I have not really watched any of it, but in the glimpses that I see,
Yeah.
I can see that like a lot of the equipment is about there.
Yeah.
If not a little bit like um what's the right word? Um hopeful is not the right word, but um an exaggerated
Yeah.
an exaggeration of some of the equipment that's there, but the tactics look okay. And
Yeah.
that's because I've come to learn that they're using a lot of technical advisors who've been in combat for the past 20 years, right? Representing these various units. So
Yeah.
from an accurate perspective, I think a lot of movies now, not your B type movies, like your
Right.
direct to streaming
Yeah.
movies. A lot of those I see, they're just as bad as they were in the old days, right? It's like
Yeah.
what they're
Yeah.
wearing, how they're wearing it, how they speak, all that type of stuff. But for the big productions, like movies nowadays seem like they get a lot more right than they get wrong, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
movies I think in general have come a long way in that sense that back in the day, like I watched a Coen Brothers version of True Grit, which is one of my all-time favorite movies with Jeff Bridges, um, and the old John Wayne version, and it was ridiculous. The John Wayne version was just hokey, and it was embarrassing. But that's the way they made movies back then, and it was just cheesy. There's so much more realism today, and I think across the board, but certainly with the military. I wanted to ask you about one. What about one of my all-time faves was Platoon with Charlie Sheen and Forrest Whitaker. Can't remember all who was in it, but
Yeah,
Bearing.
Platoon Platoon, yeah. Platoon for me, I think, and I've got randomly someone's doing yard work in the yard next to mine,
Of
so
course.
perfect timing. So I'm coming in and out of mute. But Platoon, I think, is great. The thing I thought was great is that it does capture that idealistic idiot who
Yeah.
joins who
Yeah.
joins the military, of which I would put myself in that bucket, you
Yeah. Me
know.
too.
Like there are some folks who joining the military is a great way to sort of a great social ladder, right? A
Yeah.
way to pull yourself out of bad situations. And then you've got some folks who, middle class suburban kids,
Yeah.
of which that's exactly what I was, who had this idealistic idea of what it meant to serve in the military and to serve your country and to go overseas and fight for your country. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just
Yeah.
being realistic about what it is. It's
Yeah.
idealism that propels you versus need or necessity.
Sure.
Um, and I thought the way he talks, the way he thinks about his situation, and how it devolves as he
Yeah.
as he's confronted with reality, and how ugly combat is, and how
Yeah.
ugly military service can be.
Oh yeah.
That's from an accurate perspective. That's the thing I would say that hit home for me. In terms of the rest of the stuff, it's not I'm not of that time, so it's hard for me to be able to do it. It seems legit, but because I know Platoon was what's the director's name?
Oliver Stone. He was a
Yeah, and
sergeant.
he was in Vietnam. So when you've got like an actual, especially the director, right? If you got the director and he was a grunt on the ground in
Yeah.
Vietnam, I'm gonna go ahead and give the benefit of the doubt that probably most of it he's gonna, because veterans just can't help ourselves.
Yeah.
Like the small
Yeah.
things really bother us when we see
Fathers.
it. Yeah.
I thought they did a really good job of what I know of Vietnam. Most of that I know from Mike. Of course he wasn't army, but it's about a ground pounding infantry, about as low on the totem pole as you get in the shitstorms of Vietnam. I think it did a good job of showing how bad things could be and how bad life could be, the stressors and all of that. But there's an interesting. I heard Oliver Stone on it was a podcast, but I cannot recall which one. Seems like it was a military dude, but he was talking about the making of Platoon, and it was really interesting. I mean, he's a smart guy, obviously. Whatever you think, one way or the other, he's really a genius and as a director and a writer. But he said what he wanted to do in that movie was capture the life of an infantryman in a platoon. And he said he also wanted to show how, in his opinion, it was the sergeants that really were the competent ones that got stuff done or didn't. It was on that level, that E5, E6 level, that really, and I think to this day, I think about that a lot. And that's about the rank. E5, E6, E7s are ones really running the show. Officers come in and out, and you have good ones, you have bad ones we've talked about, but It's really that those ranks are when you're competent, you're at your height of competency, you've got some experience, you've gotten some gut punches along the way, and your ego is tampered down, and you realize, okay, this is serious business. So it was just interesting to hear him talk about that, but I thought it was overall pretty accurate.
We can't we can't have a discussion about movies and accuracy and inaccuracies without talking about the gold standard in Navy SEAL movies,
Sarcasm is thick.
Navy SEALs with
Huh.
Charlie Sheen. Were you in at the
Yeah,
time that came out? Were you already in the teams when that
I
came
was
out?
in the teams. In fact, okay, yeah. The producer of that movie, the producer director, I think he was the producer. He was from Dev Group. His last name is Farr, and it was it was painful to watch. Um, there were some funny moments in it, but it was, if there was any enjoyment in watching it, it was mostly laughing at it. Um, it was just very, it was inaccurate on a lot of levels. But yeah, he came out to San Diego
Mhm.
to do a pre-screening before it was released with all the stills. It was like a free night at the movies. He rented out a whole theater, and it was all team guys in there, and all of us just cracking up. We probably had some beers, and we were just like, people were yelling stuff out loud. It was just a riot. And then the most painful thing about it, right after that, Bruce and I went to SODIC, which is the Army sniper course, the Special Forces sniper course at Bragg.
Mm.
And the movie had been out for a couple weeks, and oh, did we take our fair share of ribbing at sniper school by the Army guys. And it was fun. It was lighthearted, but it was still painful. Like, I remember we were in one class. I can't remember. Oh, it was dealing with scopes. You have whole classes on like scopes,
Okay.
and all this, and some Army guy, I don't know who. Bruce and I are sitting there, and we're asking questions about a certain type of scope, and somebody yells out, "I got nothing on Starlight. Switching to thermal," which is a direct line from that movie. We were just like, "Man,
Yeah.
you gotta jab it in." Okay, we deserve it. But it was just funny stuff that, yeah, it was hard to live that down when you go to an actual unit to where you're training with really good guys. I mean, really proficient guys,
Mhm.
in the special forces. I mean, heck, high up on the rung of you know operations, and then just having people throw stuff at you that is just total. There's a there's a not to digress, but there is, one of the things I'm interested in is fake martial arts, or people claiming to be some great master and they can't do dilly squat. And
Mhm.
Joe Rogan, I won't get into that, but I have my opinions about it. But I've laughed so hard listening. Joe Rogan is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he's a commentator for the UFC. So he knows fighting, and he was a champion kickboxer. Um, so he it drives him crazy. If you want to see him at his funniest, it's him talking about fake martial arts. He goes, "Well, check this guy out," and they have these like YouTube videos.
Mhm.
But he said, there's this in Japanese, there's a word for warrior called bushido,
Okay.
and so we start, those of us who are into the martial arts world have started to call fake martial arts bullshido. But anyway, I don't know where I was going with all that, but yeah, uh,
I got a question. So Top Gun, which came out mid 80s, mid 80s,
86
something like that.
was my
So
year I graduated.
Top Gun's kind of one of the famous effects of Top Gun that
Oh
came out
yeah.
was that, it portrayed in Top Gun, if for some reason you're listening, you've never heard of Top Gun's Navy aviators who Tom Cruise is the headliner, and Val Kilmer's in it, and they're going to basically like the top school. It's called Top Gun.
Top
It's like
Gun,
a
yeah.
fighter weapons school or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
it's a real school.
it's a real school. And just because I'm the type of dude that when something comes out, I go right to Wikipedia to learn about it. It was
Yeah.
based on an article that was done about the school, and then someone read the article in some magazine, decided I'm gonna make a movie off of this.
Well, they
So,
made a good one.
but from a cultural perspective, so Top Gun is kind of famous for where life after it came out, life imitated art.
Mm,
So, uh, where before where before Top Gun was, an important school to go to, is good for your career,
yeah,
and just like any TDY, maybe you blew off some steam and you had some fun at the
yeah,
O Club, the officers club back in the day, right?
yeah,
Um, Top Gun is famous for like supercharging, what it was, and then all of a sudden all these ladies are trying to get into the O Club where Top Gun is, and
yeah,
all the aviators are saying the lines and wearing the shades and
yeah,
like puffing up their chests. So in that case, life then imitated the movies,
yeah.
and things got crazy for Navy SEALs. Did you see any of that? Maybe not that exactly, but did you see instances where, like, the what was depicted in the movies was seeping into real life, how people were approaching the job or thought about the job or anything like that?
I never saw much of that for the
Mm,
still side of the house. There's a couple of angles you can think of it. Yeah, I totally get, women flocking to see people in their shoulder boards and their summer whites and these clubs with the cool ass glasses on. Um, it wasn't that side of it. There were always okay, so there were always hangouts. There's a couple in Coronado, big SEAL hangouts. I've mentioned them in the past, Danny's and McPee's, and it's almost 90% SEALs. The owners sometimes were married to SEALs or whatever,
mhm,
and they were known hangouts, and we had tons of college chicks that would come there and just you know, but it wasn't. I don't think it was movie related. I think it was just a known quantity kind of thing.
mm.
And tactically, oh, I mean, there was nothing to really imitate there.
You didn't switch to thermals.
No, yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah. The, the other thing that got me about that movie is they tried to show every potentially cool thing a SEAL could do, from locking out of a submarine to jumping out of a plane doing Halo.
Mhm,
And the regular SEAL teams back then did not, they were not all Halo qualified. You had a few guys that were,
mhm,
but a platoon was not.
mm,
Only the National Mission Unit back then was full on Halo capable.
mhm.
And then they're doing their own intel gathering. They're doing stuff that the agency would be doing. It wouldn't be guys out running around trying to collect their own intel and then go execute a mission based on that intel. It just doesn't work that way at all. And so much of that was just, and they're doing all these acrobatic, like coming through, like rappelling, breaking through a skylight and shooting on the way down on a,
Don't say that. Don't tell me that's not real. Don't
uh,
tell me that's not part of Buds Phase 4,
yeah,
Phase
it's right
4
up
of
there with
Buds,
underwater knife fighting.
which we talked about. Look for that episode.
Yeah.
But it did have a profound effect on recruiting, though, did it not?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think it did. I think it did. I think if anything, the biggest probably effect that had on society, if you want to call it that, is it exposed this group called the SEALs, which are still pretty relatively unknown back then. Like even into the, I remember when I got out, there were people who had never heard of a Navy SEAL,
Mhm.
which is, I would like to go back to those days. But now it's like, it's kind of ridiculous. Now you got Navy SEAL on CBS or whatever channel.
Yeah, that's right.
Um, so it really, it was always like, oh wow, these guys jump out of planes and they're scuba qualified and they do all this, and we never knew that. So I think if anything, it was an awareness bringing thing as an effect of the movie.
Let
After,
me let me ask, because again, the movie portrays the culture in one way,
yeah,
and it's doing it for entertainment purposes. And Charlie Sheen is acting a certain way, which, by
yeah,
the way, I'll say, like, that person does. I've seen that person before.
yeah, yeah,
That archetype.
yeah.
Um, Definitely not the rule. It's the exception. But do you think at all that movie, it increased recruiting? Do you think it brought a type of person to the pipeline, to buds, to the pipeline, more of a type of person who, because they, to your point, they have no other reference point. They think if I go to buds and I become a SEAL, I'm going to get to be Charlie Sheen, and I'm going to act that way, and I'm going to do the missions the way they do it, and I'm going to dress the way he dresses, because they have no other frame of reference. It's the
Yeah.
80s. Do you think that it drew a lot more of people seeking that to the job, to the teams?
I don't know. I
Mm,
honestly, that's a good question. I don't have anything to base it on.
mm,
I think that culture, I don't know. I don't know, slander my own culture too badly, but there was this, it goes back, and I think we did even touch on it in one episode where there was always a sense of seals are loose cannons.
sure,
They bend the rules.
sure.
Don't they fight fire with fire. You know, there are
Hmm.
these categories that are accurate, and there's a kind of a chest thumping pride to it all. I It more turned me off than anything.
Mm,
I just saw this is just bravado, and we don't need any more of that than we we can handle or that
hmm.
we can have. It's You need quiet professionalism. You don't need Rambos and chest thumping and all of that. But
Hmm.
I think I did see a lot of it in the SEAL culture. I don't know why. I think it's just a cultural thing where if you're around it and other people and people you may look up to. I remember we used to hear all these stories about, oh, so and so got handcuffed and broke away from the police and swam across the San Diego Bay because we learned drown proofing. We can swim a mile with our hands behind our back. And whether that ever happened, I don't know, but it was just these legends get spun.
Hmm.
It's like, oh, I
Yeah,
want to be like that guy. I
right.
want to be totally cool. But a lot of it, I've said too, that happens when you're young.
Hmm.
You do have a big head. You've made it through really tough training, and if you stay around for a while and operate and go do the deed, it it flushes out of your
Right.
system pretty quick. So
That makes sense.
yeah,
Um, okay. All right. Well, we're at time, so that's perfect. We'll wrap it up there. Um, we've done it. The Ranger talked about Black Hawk Down, the SEAL talked about Navy SEALs and everything in
fine.
between. So thanks for listening. We're on the road to 100 episodes here. We'll keep it going. If you got something you want us to talk about, let us know. Otherwise, we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.